So, hello to Mr. Euler. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to today's Voices of Tomorrow keynote. My name is Clara Piletic. I'm one of the Global Biotech Revolution Entrepreneurship Directors, and I'll be your host for today's fireside chat. We're incredibly honored to have with us Mr. John Oyler. He co-founded Beigene in 2010 and has been instrumental in its rise as a global biotech leader in oncology, driven by a mission to make innovative cancer treatments more affordable and accessible worldwide. John is a graduate of MIT in mechanical engineering and holds an MBA from Stanford. After beginning his career at McKinsey & Company, John's impressive path included CEO roles in companies such as Bioduro, a contract research development and manufacturing organization, and Galena Corp, where he focused on discovering novel therapeutics for central nervous system diseases. His work in biotech has truly been transformative, and today's discussion will center on three key areas: his entrepreneurship journey, the vision for Beigene, and insights into the future of biotech and pharma. Feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A tab at any time, and we will address them in the last 20 minutes. With that, thanks again to John for joining us today, and we can kick off with a fireside chat. So, John, if I start at the very beginning, you started McKinsey & Company. What were some of the lessons that you learned there as a consultant that you then took them into your entrepreneurship journey?
Great. Well, thank you for having me part of your exciting and ambitious and important initiative. I went to McKinsey because I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I had done some small business of my own when I was in college to pay for college, and was learning a lot in that process, but also learning many of the challenges that you face as an entrepreneur. And I thought by going to McKinsey, I can really build a broad palette of tools that'll be useful to me in my entrepreneurial career in the future. And I think my hope was, I can learn how companies work and learn about how to do analysis and logistics and operations and many, many different attributes. To me, at McKinsey at that time, it was really special. We still had some of the original, people who built the firm that you were able to interact very closely with. And you could hear, their experiences when McKinsey was really in its growth phase and in its initial phase. And they were tremendous and wonderful stories and adventures. And you had the ability to work closely with these people. The most special thing to me, I think, was a lot of the leadership I got to work with were extremely talented individuals. And I was able to work very, very closely with them. And a lot of those interactions were them telling me, hey, I'd like you to go do this, and then criticizing the way that I did it, because they had seen much more than I had. They understood, things that I didn't. And it was, really learning how to think better and more clearly, communicate better and more clearly, and how to, learn some of the tools and experiences that other folks had had. So I think it was, for me, the special part, getting to work with these incredibly talented individuals at a young age very closely. And I think in addition to that, the McKinsey structure, certainly at the time, was, small, tight, hardworking, roll up your sleeves, do it yourself type teams. And I think that that's something I really believe in. I've seen at every stage of my career how when you can put together a team like that, it's able to do things that nobody thinks are possible. And that's what I aspire to do on a regular basis in all of my endeavors. And my great final endeavor is Beijing, and it's certainly something that at many times I think I've seen our organization have teams that have this magic of true high performance and shock the rest of the world around them at what they're able to do and achieve.
That's amazing to hear. Thank you for your extensive answer. We have many people in this call who aspire to be consultants, so for sure that is a very valuable lesson for them to take away. You mentioned growing the team has been one of your kind of core principles that you took out also in your next career. I wonder how, as a co-founder of Beijing, how did you transition from this co-founder mindset into the big corporate CEO mindset? What were some lessons that you learned when making this transition?
Well, look, certainly things are different in a larger company, but I think that the fundamentals are the same. The fundamentals are you want to surround yourself with unbelievably talented people, and you want to have a clear, mission, vision, and sense of purpose. And you want to make sure that the people on your team are there because that's something they're passionate about. And there's a very big difference between being passionate about it and it being, just a job. It's very obvious, it's very evident, but there's a huge difference. When you're passionate about something, you can't stop thinking about it no matter how hard you try. And when it's just a job, it's really easy to turn it off at any moment. So I think, those elements, finding the right people that share a clear mission, a clear vision, a clear passion, having those things, that's the most important elements of being able to really have huge impact, do something truly meaningful and change the world. How do we try to do that? The piece that I have taken from McKinsey and my co-founder, who's a scientist, has taken from the scientific world is we really try to be fact and logic based. We can be hypothesis driven for sure, and you never know what the world's going to be like in the future. So any strategic plan is hypothesis driven. But at the same point in time, you try to understand what are the facts, what are the hypotheses, what are your assumptions between that, and what are alternative scenarios and ways that the world could evolve. If you're going to do that, that means anyone can have ideas and anyone can challenge any ideas and anyone can ask any leader, okay, that's what you want to do. Why? Why does this make sense? I think a lot of times in, big multinational corporations, we stop doing that. And there isn't time for that. And, you can't ask those questions of your boss or your boss's boss, or you need to follow the process in the right channel because no one wants to get embarrassed along the way. And, the other premise we have in our company is information should flow relatively freely. Why are we constraining information so no one gets embarrassed? Right? It's okay to be embarrassed. Look, nobody's perfect in any job. It doesn't matter who you are, you're not perfect. And there's a brilliant YouTube video. I think it's Federer speaking at a graduation speech, which you should watch. And, he talks about, I'm one of the world's best tennis players, but I forget the numbers, but I've, only won 60% of my matches ever. 40% I lost. And, when you go through that and you look at anyone who's truly excellent at anything, whatever the field is, the only reason they can be that good is they've taken lots of risks where they failed and they've learned and they've honed their skills and they've grown. So, if you're in an organization and, you made the wrong decision, you did something wrong, that's not a problem. That's truth. It's just a fact. It's going to happen. So why are we embarrassed by this? We shouldn't be. We should let the information flow. We should try to work with everyone to find the right answers at all moments in time. And I think at, the organizations that I'm part of, that's a big part of things. Let's be less focused on controlling information and information flow, more focused on, let's enable that dialogue. And if someone doesn't understand things, let's be forced to explain why. And in that process, we all learn. And we may learn something that surprises us. And, I've learned in several instances, hey, one of my assumptions was wrong. And if I think about it differently, there's a better way to do things. So let's change. And that's okay. So I think that's the biggest lesson, to me in trying to grow from an organization which is small and entrepreneurial. There's always that information flow. You can't have bureaucracy. There's not enough people. But as you get bigger, it's, how to build the organization in a way that you can try to create that in a way to, as much as you can. From the other perspective, in a bigger organization, it's hard for everyone to know everything that's going on. They can't. I can't. And I have access to it all, but I can't spend enough time to know everything everywhere that's happening. So, you have to grow through the comfort of understanding that. But in that process, it's incredibly important to be communicating what is happening to everyone in the organization so they can see that and understand it. And I think, this open communication and clear communication is just so, so important in any organization. But the bigger you get, probably the more important it is.
It's amazing to hear how you're putting communication in the epicenter of your leadership style. I wonder if there was a defining challenge that defined you as a leader, and placing this communication first.
I don't know that I can answer that. I mean, I think there's a defining incident when you're an entrepreneur, probably every that is, it requires a lot of thought, a lot of energy, and it's a decision to be made for the organization or a situation you have to handle and deal with. And from those perspectives, there's just so many of them. And I think they all define who you are in an organization. I do think that, the moments that define who you are as a person and the moments that define who an organization is how they handle difficult situations. And, we all know that in life and we see it in life, but, when situation's great, you don't understand the true character of either an organization or of a person. When the situation's extremely challenging, you quickly learn in both situations a lot about both of those things. And I think what we all should be trying to do as people, and I think it's part of the reason the people in your organization are together, is they want to have a positive impact on the world. If we want to do that, we're good people, then we want to make sure that when we're in those difficult and challenging positions, how do we behave? And we want to behave the way, we know we should. We all know in our heart what that's like. It doesn't matter which country we're from, what religion we are, whether we're male or female or whatever. We all know there's a sense of, what the right way to behave is. And I think the same is true for organizations. And I think that you want your organization to have a very, very strong sense of that. And that comes through culture. And it comes through the way everyone in the organization behaves, the senior people too, everyone. So I think these are the important pieces. And I would say, to be honest, McKinsey was very good at trying to build a culture. And I think that's a piece that I've learned and I believe is important for entrepreneurial and non-entrepreneurial organizations. How do you build and keep a culture that creates the things you want in it, but also creates the values? And to me, it's very, very important that Beigene is an ethical company, that Beigene is doing things that help people, never sacrificing quality, but also trying to work as a positive force in the industry to where we see places, even if it's not in Beigene's best interest, if we see places where we can make the world better for patients, that we try to push for those types of changes, whether it's regulatory policy, whether it's, collaboration, we have to do that first. And if you do that first, we do believe the rest will take care of itself. I can't hear you. You may be muted.
Oh,
You're back. You're
yeah,
back.
okay, perfect. So kind of taking this forward, Beijing tries to really bring cancer treatment to be more affordable and more accessible to people. And I wonder, what do you think is Beijing's innovation stack? So the unique capabilities and skills that makes Beijing uniquely positioned to achieve that in the cancer therapeutics market?
Yeah, so I think that it's a great question. I think that, when we were founding the company, my scientist co-founder and myself knew we could do great science. We knew that we could do science that would make impactful oncology medicines. We were sure of that. But both of us had spent a lot of time globally. And we also knew that at that time, only 1/6 of the world's population would ever get an innovative oncology medicine. Only 1/6. So you had this great science, this great medicine, and 1/6 of the world gets it, that's all. Now, the majority of those medicines were small molecules. The cost of making them is almost nothing. The issue is there's a huge upfront cost in running clinical trials. It's not research, it's not manufacturing, it's all clinical trials, which is important because we have to show that these are safe and that they're efficacious, or they shouldn't be approved. That's a good thing. But it's so expensive to do that. But once they're approved, it doesn't cost much to make the actual pill that someone's going to take. The other medicines were largely antibodies, which at the time I think we thought were expensive to manufacture. In reality, now that we're a manufacturer, they're not really much more expensive than small molecules. The cost of goods is relatively small. It's partially because we've been very good at manufacturing in that area. We've made huge technological advances, not we as in my company, the industry. And the result of that is we now are able to make these very cost effectively. But still, the upfront costs are huge. 75 to 90% of the total cost of a medicine delivered to a patient is in clinical trials. So we saw that, we understood it, we realized it. And largely clinical trials were all being run in a very small set of centers in the world, in the US and in Europe and a little bit in Japan. And your studies would get backed up. It would take you years to enroll the patients you needed for a lung cancer trial. And the costs, the longer it takes you, the more you're paying because the trial's longer. So you're paying more and more and more. And the cost was just really growing massively in this area. And I think what we realized, and this is a business observation, it's a classic, you're looking for an opportunity in the world. We were looking for it because we wanted to help more people. But from a business analysis of that situation, it was really clear that if you could change fundamentally the cost structure of clinical trials, you could change the cost of everything everywhere. First point. The second point was understanding the cost of goods sold is actually really small. Your issue with drug pricing, drug cost is your upfront cost is huge. But if the variable cost is really small, why does a medicine at that time in China, which is the largest incidence of cancer, 25% of the world's diagnoses, at that time, an innovative medicine from Roche would be sold at a price premium to the United States. It was an 18%, I think, price premium to the US. No one could afford it. No one got any medicine. There was no reimbursement there. The market was zero. Now, it was priced lower in Latin America, but not much lower. Maybe it was half of US price. But even so, you were looking at medicines that the monthly cost was $5,000 a month for an oncology medicine without a reimbursement system that could afford it. But the cost of making it was almost nothing. And if you think about this, it doesn't make any sense, because if the incremental cost is very small, why not make a little bit? You have a high gross margin. Why not make a little bit in Latin America, but help everyone there and bring it back to pay for this upfront clinical trial? Even if only 10% of the upfront clinical trial cost could be covered by Latin America, well, then your price could be 10% less in US and Europe and Japan. And what if 10% could be covered by China, and 10% could be covered by the rest of Asia? That's 30%. Now you've lowered the cost because you're serving these markets. You're just serving them at a lower and a more attractive price. So there really were two elements in the business observation we made. The first was, God, if you could cut clinical trial costs in half, then you have a much better industry. You can get medicine at half price to everybody. But secondly, if you could get medicine not to 1/6 of the world, but let's say profitably, not different profit levels, but profitably to 2/3 of the world, right? 2/3 is 4/6. That's 4 times as many people. And you would be lowering the cost per patient overall by 1/8 of what it previously was. And if that were the case, you'd be at a price point that people all over the world could get these medicines. Now, the last third of the world, we care about those folks too. We have to work with NGOs. It's not going to contribute to lowering price in US and Europe and Japan. That's okay. We work with NGOs to do that. But the concept was, we realized two business things that have changed. First, the cost of goods sold is so small that there should be a way to bring this medicine to everyone in the world. And second, it's all upfront cost, and the cost upfront is so high that we have to build a business completely focused on how you cut this in half. So how do we plan to cut it in half? We had 3 ways of doing that. One was technology. All information was being manually double entered. And when you manually double enter, you type it in, you have 5% error rate. There's a huge amount of data, so you have a huge amount of errors. And then after you manually type it in, you've got to send people back to check what's in that versus the source data. So it's this very amazing, clumsy, take forever system that in today's world is just unimaginable, but that's the system. So work on technology first. Secondly, the whole industry had moved to third-party CROs, and there's only a handful of them. And they did the vast majority of this work throughout the world. The problem with them is when you said, let's go to a center somewhere else, I want to enroll patients, and I said this, in Chiang Mai in Thailand, because there's a really good, I think it was a Harvard-trained breast cancer specialist there, and I want to work with her. They said, you can do that, it's $2 million. Well, if I was just going to another site in Australia, it was 20,000. Why is it 100 times as expensive? Because they really weren't interested in going. So we said, you got to get rid of these companies. And these companies, don't have aligned incentives to lower the cost of this. It's their business is not to fix the problems. The more work there is, the more issues there are, the poorer the data is, the more work there is, the more their profits are. So we really decided get rid of them, build everything ourselves, which no biotech does that. But we did that. We have 3,500 people across the globe today. We became very quickly the largest clinical trial sponsor in Australia. I think we have nearly 200 people there of our own running clinical trials. We're building out a lot now. We're building out in South Africa. We just are in the process of a pretty big initiative in Brazil. I think we're over 50 people in Brazil running clinical trials, and that'll continue to expand. But all across the world, in 45, 50 countries, we're running trials, and we try to do that ourselves. So it was technology, do it yourself, don't use the CROs. And the third piece was, if the problem is there's not enough centers, there's not enough patients, there's not enough people available, instead of fishing in the same pond everyone else is fishing in, let's go out and let's teach everyone to fish everywhere. And when you work with a center in Chiang Mai, you work with many more centers in Australia or in Brazil, you're bringing all those centers into global clinical trials. And it's harder, it's more work. But once you do that, not only for us, but for all companies, you now have a broader set of capabilities, a broader set of centers to go to. And the costs, which have tripled, they've gone from probably $100,000 per patient on a clinical trial. Just think about it, $100,000 per patient to 300. Today, they're probably 300. For our medicine that's approved for hematology, I think we've dosed between 5,000 and 6,000 patients. You can do that math quickly in your head. Any registration trial that you're running, any program for anything today, probably you're talking about certainly having 1,000 patients, certainly. So, it's very easy to look at those programs and understand costs and where they are. So this was the third piece of our, initiative is let's try to work across the world with many more centers, bring them into this global high quality clinical trial. They love it. They're excited to do it. And there's great, incredibly well-trained people in many countries. And, they're from Harvard, they're from, Stanford, they're from Dana-Farber, they're from MD Anderson, they're from the best cancer centers in the world, but they've gone home. And they know how to do things in a really high quality fashion, but they were not able to really get into the system as easily. Now we're really working closely to do that. So it's really those two observations to my co-founder and I, first of all, could solve this real need, which is how do you get affordable medicine to more people? But I think also it dawned on me as a business person, this is kind of one of those once in a life things that you see that can have huge impact and really be transformational. And I think as we've gone down this path, we're 14, 15 years into our initiative now. We really believe if we can show this works, if we can bring these centers in, we can not only provide more affordable and accessible medicine, but we can blaze this path, show that it is credible, show that it's the right path, and then the rest of the players in the industry will follow us. And I think that has happened, certainly in doing clinical work in Australia and in Asia and in China, and, hopefully in Brazil and South Africa now and many other places. But I think also we want to show the commercial piece that you can, generate contribution margin that comes back from the rest of the world to help you lower your prices in US and Europe. And to that end, our first two products that we've launched in the United States, the world's biggest market, we launched at discounts to the other products in the space. No company does that, but we did that. And the first product we launched, Brukinsa, it's a product that we launched, I think, 30,000 plus a year, lower price than a medicine that's being commercialized that basically we knew we were better than. And we've shown in head-to-head studies we're safer and we're more efficacious. Head-to-head study, it's clear. No company does that and then prices at a discount, but we did. So, we're true to what we say, we're true to what we believe, and we're not losing out on that because we brought those medicines other places in the world. And we do believe in those areas we can do, better than companies have historically to make up for that and drive us to, show this model is very real and very robust. So, sorry.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah, thank you. I agree that the clinical trial side is very interesting to tackle, and I'm glad that you found the innovation within that area to help with the accessibility and affordability. You started your company in China, and you mentioned that it was in parts also because of the talent going back to their home country. I wonder if there's some aspects of Chinese biotech ecosystem that would be beneficial if translated somewhere else. Is there some lessons that you learned in working in China?
Well, so actually, when we started the company, we had two parts to our company. Part of the company, was this belief in clinical trials and we can do them better and we can do them differently. That part actually we started in Philadelphia. We also started a research piece that was in China at the same time. So we had China and the US from the beginning. Unfortunately, the clinical program that we in-licensed for the clinical team was competitive with PD-1, which is the biggest breakthrough ever in oncology. So that program kind of died and didn't go as quickly as we could. So our research kind of took over for a bit, but then our clinical now is much bigger than our research from that perspective. But we certainly have operated in all these countries, Australia, Korea, from the beginning. So I think we know a lot about China, but we also know about being global from day one. And I think a couple lessons in that we believe. If you think the key to this is how you run clinical trials globally, and I've just said if you want to be affordable, that's the key. The second thing then is after you've done that, also being able to figure out how to distribute, hopefully at a lower price, but successfully in all these countries. It means if you want to be affordable and accessible, from day one, when we founded the company, we know we have to be much more global than even the multinationals in our space. So that means we have to be in China, we have to be in Australia, we have to be in Korea, we have to be in Latin America, we have to be everywhere. So when we started the company, we said, actually, I said, we're a headquarterless company. We're everywhere and nowhere. And people said, John, you can't say that. That makes it sound like you have no leadership. So I said, okay. Then I changed and I was like, our headquarters are on United Airlines because no one was flying on United Airlines more than me all over the world. I was doing Europe then, like a US, Europe, Asia, US, Europe, Asia, US, Europe, Asia. It was exhausting. 3 continents is much harder than 2. And I said it's on United Airlines. And we said that for years. Well before the pandemic, we found this beautiful, technology company, Zoom. And actually, the way I found it was my in-laws visited our San Francisco office, and I was busy in the morning, so my wife took them to see Google and Facebook. And then they came and visited our office. Let me give you advice to any entrepreneur. If you want to impress your in-laws, don't have them go visit Google and Facebook's offices before they visit yours, because they want to know why you don't have dance machines and free food and video games and everything else. But, my wife said to me at that point, she said, look, what you need to see and understand is the way they work. Just when you go there and you walk through, you can see this massive online video collaboration, everything else. It's so different than your company. Your company and your industry is dated. You really have to see this. And so I went and visited afterwards. I didn't get the tour where I got to eat the free food and do the dancing and the video games, apparently. I just got to see the offices. But it was so obvious we weren't working in the same way. And I came back and I said, everywhere we need to be massively video enabled. And, those companies have their own platforms. But we found Zoom and we completely moved to it. And I think, with the part of the team that we had in China, it was very evident the power of, WeChat and that platform. And we really just started looking at what are all the things we can do to communicate as well as you can when you're spread out. And so, many, many people in this industry will say, John Oyler introduced me to Zoom. And actually, I was at an investor meeting in Singapore with a ton of investors. And they said, John, how do you handle it? Where do you say your headquarters are? And I said, actually, our headquarters are on Zoom. And one of Zoom's investors like literally stood up and is like, that's the greatest thing I've ever heard. I have to tell the CEO about this. So they told the CEO. And a couple years later, I met him at Stanford. And I said, I'm John Oyler. And he goes, I know who you are. You're the guy who always said that our headquarters were on Zoom. So, we've always had this concept of, how you build an organization that you don't have to be in one place. Because if you say your headquarters are, London, or you say they're Basel, or you say they're wherever you choose to say, San Francisco, wherever, everyone else feels like they're a second-class citizen. And they feel like if I really want to be part of the leadership team, I have to be willing to spend a lot of my time in that city. Am I willing to do it? And if you truly want to be global, you want people from your leadership team to have experiences from all over the globe. So, we've built ourselves in that way. It has incredible strengths. There's also incredible challenges because as powerful as we've seen with all this online collaboration, there's no substitution in many circumstances for being in person. So there's all the challenges about how you build a system, a culture, the right way to work to create those in-person interactions and be as effective as you can in communication, decision-making, team building. And we have not solved all that. We have issues there that we're working on. But I think this is the challenge for all companies today. How do you be global? And how do you use all the tools we have and then find the right way to interact, in person to be as effective as you can as an organization? I think it's really interesting, business theory, science, and it's evolving and we're all trying to learn and understand from it. But it's really, interesting and exciting. I think you're muted again.
Oh, sorry. It's great to hear that you were at the forefront of the communication digitalization since pre-COVID. I wonder if there's some specific technologies and innovation that you see are going to be the next frontier in biotech and pharma, particularly in oncology, that you will be potentially also taking advantage on and leading this space.
Sure. Well, clearly everyone's trying to figure out how to use, AI and language learning and the tools that, are new in this space. And I think that, people would like to do that across the board. To be honest, like most things, a lot of it's being used initially in commercialization because there's a lot of data there and there's a lot of money there. And you can run experiments and see quick results and other things, for better and for worse. At the same point in time, the hope is you can really do this both in the research and in the clinical development side of things. And I think that we do believe there's a lot of opportunity for that. But fundamentally, the biggest need today is to leverage all of the real world data that we have. And in that area, there's a fundamental problem. We don't collect the information in a high quality fashion. So the companies that have tried to do this fail. And, right now in the United States, which is of course a very important market, there's one company, Epic, and they really dominate with extreme market power this kind of hospital data entry space. And they're really built for billing. They're not built for collecting high quality data. That's what they were built for. And that's what their goal was, that was their mission. That's what they do. But the reality is because they do that, because all the data is entered through the system, it's not focused on how you get the right science and people data to be able to learn and understand what's really happening. And this is very important for us to understand early safety signals in medicines that are commercialized. It's important for us to understand if there's 3 different medicines in a class, which works best in each of the different subpopulations and situations. And, to me, it should be mandatory that any system being used at a hospital, the first prerequisite of it before billing should be that it collects high quality data that can be used, for all of us to understand and learn. And by the way, the value of that data is tremendous. The industry spends billions and billions and billions of running clinical trials, which are still important and we need to do. But some of that money could be repurposed to really understand from this real world environment and certainly pay for the modifications that are necessary to ensure that that software is of the highest quality. And I think that for people that are global, the US, it's a real problem. And of course, Epic lets you read in and read and write supposedly, now that Google has sued them, and Google can succeed in suing them because they have enough money. But we know how all these platforms are that you can read into and write out of. It's not really an open playing field. So I think that's a lot of opportunities, though, across the world in different countries. For places like Singapore, for example, where they have an ability to work very closely with the government and collect that information and have it for their population. It's a smaller population, but collecting that information, you can do it in a high quality fashion and leverage the value of that data and the learnings. It can be incredible for patients for sure. So I think that's a very interesting and exciting area. It's very hard from an entrepreneurial perspective because you have big barriers, but that doesn't mean, everything like that, eventually someone figures out a way to, find their little crevice and then build something into it and maybe eventually, become the most important organization there. So I think that's a very exciting place for sure.
Definitely some food for thought for all the entrepreneurs listening to your talk. We will now move to some of the interesting questions that the participants have asked, and I'll just read them out loud for you. So Cynthia saying, thank you for the inspiring sharing. In the context of expanding drug access for cancer patients, what collaborative strategies do Beigene and diagnostics companies employ to implement biomarker and or companion diagnostics testing for patients with that clinical need?
It's a great question. I wouldn't say that Beigene has been on the forefront of anything biomarker related yet. We're trying to be, and actually I just met with our head of biomarker in the San Mateo office where I am today, and he's ex-Genentech, super talented guy, and we're talking about what we can do in that area for CLL patients, for example. But in this area, I do think it's a place that we aspire to have impact. And we now are one of the largest oncology R&D companies in the world. This year, we'll put over 10 potential new medicines in the clinic. And we're doing, more clinical work than many of the major pharmaceutical companies in oncology. So I think in this area, we have the level of activity that we should be important and having impact, but it's early for us still as a company, and I don't want to pretend we've done something we haven't. One of the important challenges with all the biomarkers is how to develop it in a way so that they're affordable enough to be run in countries that don't have the resources. So in CLL, the most important thing you can understand if you're a CLL patient is, do you have a mutation of deletion 17p or p53? P53, of course, is the gene that creates cellular instability. And if you have a deletion 17p mutation, by default, you have a p53 problem. So that means any medicine you give, anything you're trying to treat a disease with, your CLL can now evolve and mutate around it much more rapidly. So this is a really, really important test. And like every patient should have it when they're diagnosed. Probably every patient should have it on a regular basis. But certainly anytime a patient progresses, they should be retested. Even in the United States, this probably only happens 50% of the time. And many places in the world, it either doesn't happen at all, people do not know, and they still treat the patients, or they test them originally when they first present and never test again. But the truth is, this really matters, because if you have this, if you have chemotherapy, you really shouldn't have chemotherapy. That's proven. There's fixed dose therapy now. That's a new, nice thing, because you can have a fixed duration of treatment. But you definitely, it's very clear you shouldn't have that if you have deletion 17p, p53. There's other treatments in the BTK space for Brukinsa, but we've shown in a study versus Imbruvica, the first medicine, after 39 months, I think with a COVID adjustment, like 35, 36% of the patients on Imbruvica haven't progressed. For us, it's 70%, 60, I think it's 63%. So it's, much, much difference. And the other medicine in this space, which is from AstraZeneca, acalabrutinib, I think in their study head-to-head in the same population, again, Imbruvica is about 35, 36, 37%. And I think their medicine is only 30. So if you're a deletion 17p patient, you really want to know that. And you really want to know if you're a deletion 17p patient when you're deciding which medicine you want to take. So in all of this biomarker area, it's really, really important. And what we're trying to do in that is reduce the cost of that test, because it's still a couple $1,000s to run the test. The cheaper that is, the easier it is to run more frequently. So that's the sort of thing we're trying to do, but we're not in a leadership position yet, for sure.
Thank you for answering the question. We have another one from Robbie, who is saying, thank you for the insights, John. Do you think there has been much personal sacrifice as an entrepreneur? How do you find the right balance between your personal and professional lives?
I think that to say you're an entrepreneur and not understand that's like massive personal sacrifice is naive. If you're a successful entrepreneur, you have to care. And if you care, unless you're lucky, some people are lucky, I'm not, but unless you're lucky and you like win the lottery, you're likely as and then I don't know if you're really an entrepreneur because you win the lottery so quickly, you're part of a big company, it's hard to say. But, to me, every company that I've been involved in building, and there's a handful, has teetered on absolute potential disaster. And when that happens, you have a bunch of people who they and their families rely on you. And it's a huge burden of responsibility. And the bigger your company gets, the bigger that gets. And, very seldom are you at the stage that goes away. And, from that perspective, there's huge personal sacrifice. So how do you balance it all? Well, you deeply love your family. And when you deeply love your family, you're always going to find a way to make enough time for them. You're probably sleep deprived, but you're going to do it. That's the way it is. And, there's no question that I'm all in on what I'm doing, and I love it. I don't think of it as work. I think of it as, what I'm here for is to try to make affordable medicine and try to transform the industry and try to make this happen. It's fun. It's not always fun, but it's my mission. It's what I want to do with my free time. But when it's time for family, I'm there for family. When my friends need me, I'm there for my friends. And so, you find that somehow. And, you do need to take time from the tasks which you do on a regular basis to remove yourself and think. And look, when you remove yourself and think, you're still going to think about what you're doing. You just may not be in a meeting. You may not be reading your email. you'll still be thinking about it. And even when you're not, it'll be processing somewhere there in the back of your head, the things that you're struggling with and the problems you have. But like, I think that, you know, anyone who tells you they have the answer to how they manage their work-life balance is probably somewhat of a liar. It's damn hard. And if you love life, and if you love people, and if you love family, and if you love friends, the fundamental reality is we all have far too little time to do everything that we want to do while we're here. And so, don't waste your time. You know, every minute you have. I'm famous. At one point, early in this company, some people went to look for me in my apartment, and they couldn't speak the language of the person at the front desk, and they were trying to ask if I was there. And the way, this was 14 years ago, the way they communicated to the person at the front desk, was I there, is they went like this. They kind of squinched their head like this, like I had a cell phone here. And then they were like this, holding a laptop, typing like this as he walked. And the guy immediately knew it was me, because I would carry my cell phone like this, carry my laptop like this, and be typing every time I walked in. And they're like, oh, okay, I know where you're going, because they didn't know what apartment I was in. And then he told them my apartment and showed them up to my apartment. And, don't waste your time and multitask, and don't waste your time. It's easy today. It's easy on devices to waste your time.
Wonderful. I heard a good sentence the other day. It's not a work-life balance, but work-life harmony. So sounds a little bit along those lines that you have. We have another question from Bianca saying, considering the rapid advancements in AI and NLP, could you share Beigene's strategic vision for leveraging these technologies to drive innovation? Specifically, how do you see AI and NLP transforming areas like drug discovery, clinical, and research?
So I think I tried to describe that a little bit in clinical already. And in commercial, it's happening in many ways, some of which are frightening. I also think there's a lot about what is the truth that AI comes up with, and what is the source for that truth. And, it's going to change and it's going to evolve. But right now, it's not accurate. And, don't type what's the best medicine and expect that to be an accurate answer today. It's not, and it arguably is highly manipulative. And so that's a problem. And that probably needs regulation and other things, and we'll see how that evolves. On the clinical side, I've spoken to. On the drug discovery side, there's a lot exciting happening, and there's big initiatives associated with things in that area. Mark Tessier-Levine, who had run Stanford and Rockefeller and is from Genentech, recently has, become CEO of an organization that I think has raised $1 billion to look in that area, really this with some of the top folks in that space. And that's a really exciting, field that people are investing quite heavily in. I think that we talk to many of the players in this space, and we look at what's happening today. And I think that in protein folding, it's very clear there's value. And I think in medicinal chemistry, in optimization of medicines, in your real ability to target, undruggable targets, there's a lot of talk, and there's a lot of hits, which are like early potential medicines. But so far, in general, that hasn't translated into, there's things that are really likely to be great medicines or have shown they're great medicines. I think the whole world believes that in some time frame, 5-10 years from now, probably we'll be able to do that. But the problem with it is you really need the clinical data. And a lot of the historic information whether even at a big pharmaceutical company, it's just terribly stored and inaccessible, and would take billions of dollars to fix, to be able to leverage. So I think that the other thing is, even if you have all the research information, you need to tie it to the clinical side. And then you need the research information to be collected and curated in a way that it's usable. And then on the clinical side, from a publication, you can't see the detailed data. You need the detailed data, which also is not built for this purpose. But I think knowing that these tools and this power exists, as we restructure the research data and as we restructure the clinical data, which, as I've said, is highly problematic, and hopefully the real world data thereafter, then we'll have an unbelievable platform where these can be very valuable and where the real world clinical data can reach back and correlate with the preclinical data to really help you understand things much better. But I think that it's still early days, which is good if you're looking for opportunities, but it's early days in this area.
Thank you very much for this extensive answer. I'm aware of time, and I would just like to thank you very much again for joining us today here. This was an excellent talk that everyone really enjoyed. I think all the participants would agree with me in thanking you for participating in our session today. I wish you a wonderful day and all the best with making medicines more accessible and affordable for patients as you go along with the development.
Well, thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye, everyone.